Join us at Denver Community Media every fall for Harvest Your Creativity, a month-long celebration where we offer free, hands-on media workshops and events designed to help you learn new skills, meet other creatives, and just hit record.
Hi, my name is Geary and I work with Denver Parks and Rec, and I'm a self-proclaimed costume creator and prop maker and haunted house builder. And so part of my role with the city is I help work to build our annual haunted house. And this year it's going to be at La Alma Rec Center. So come check it out next week. It goes on the 18th, 19th, and 20th at La Alma from 4 to 8 p.m. And part of that is I get to work with a wonderful team of people to create this crazy vision in my head and their heads as well. And so the process starts out, actually this presentation is going to be, covering the haunted house and prop making and costume making and all the things and that I do. But the process for the haunted house, it starts off with an idea. And this idea can range from, something I see in a movie, something I see in a different haunted house, maybe like a nightmare, really anything, or just something that someone comes to me. So for example, this year that we are trying to focus on different nightmares. And since we target youth, we kind of think of like, okay, what are things that youth are afraid of, or even adults are afraid of, myself, So we think about that and we're like, all right, fear of the dark, some generic basic ones. You've got fear of the dark, fear of spiders, arachnophobia. Clowns are usually a big one, fear of clowns. Fear of just Halloween in general, like your typical Halloween movies, like your maybe your Five Nights at Freddy's or something, or Michael Myers, or a Freddy Krueger, things like that. And then just scary things in general. And then so we take that and we think, all right, how can we build a haunted house around that? It's like, okay, let's try to break apart the haunted house into rooms based on each fear. So then we look at, all right, we want a clown room, we want a dark room, we want a spider room, we want a Halloween room. And say, okay, we got these rooms. So now what? Now what do we do with these rooms? And so then it kind of branches off. And a lot of us that I work with have different areas of, I'll call, expertise and things that we like. Excuse me, sorry. I like the creative piece of the creatures and the decorations and the costumes. Not so much of a builder in like a carpentry, build up walls sort of sense. I can build things, but that's not my area of expertise. So I rely on one of my teammates, and he will take the time to come up with the floor plan. And so previously we were at St. Charles Rec Center, if you're familiar with that. It's in the Rhino 5 Points area. We would go and use their gym, one of their gyms. They have 2 gyms. And he would measure out the entirety of that gym to get, the square footage and a 2-scale drawing of the gym floor. And then he'll come back to me and we'll sit there and kind of sketch out, how we want our floor plan to be and how we want it to lay out, how we want people to walk through our haunted house that best utilizes the space efficiently. And gets, allows our actors to freely move and really scare and get into the element. And so this year, since we're being at La Alma Rec Center this year, we are, same thing. We went to an area in the rec center and he kind of measured out and walked out the spaces. He's phenomenal at doing it and getting kind of a layout. And so since we're doing a smaller version this year and the spaces only allows us to do kind of like 4 rooms in a more of a straight line, he sat down and sketched out kind of a layout of how he wanted. And then from there, he then kind of uses some math and some really smarts of his to create it to scale. It's a 2-scale drawing so that then he can come back to me and the rest of the team and say, all right, here's the layout of our haunted house. We've got, 4 rooms. They're going to line up like this. Now, how do we want to, quote unquote, I guess, flesh out these rooms and really build them and bring them to life? How can we enhance this design more? So, I am a huge fan of creating experiences for the youth and the adults that come through to our event, right? So I'm thinking, all right, what more can we add? Even with it being a smaller attraction, how can we, really ramp up the production of it? And so last year, actually, we bought a motion platform, which hopefully goes well this year. I'm really excited to test out. And I try to get as close to the professionals as we can, with what we're allowed to do. of course. And it's a platform, it's a 5x5 platform, you know, and it raises up and down, left and right. And so we can program this platform to kind of shake, rattle, and roll. And my idea was like, you know, what if we made the idea of, you know, you're descending into your nightmares, into madness, so to speak. And so what if it's like an elevator, quote unquote, you know, getting into your imagination, you know, we can kind of zhuzh this platform up to be like an elevator. So that we'll have the guests walk into this elevator, we'll have an actor, someone in there, you know, freak them out a little bit, ramp them up, and trigger the button to start the elevator. And the elevator is going to raise up and shake, rattle, and roll. Maybe not roll, but shake. And we would usher them off, and then they would then go into the first room. And so with that idea in mind, then we go back to layout and say, okay, we can put this platform here. We can have the doors here and have this spacing here. And you have to really be considerate about, you know, meeting the ADA compliances, so for wheelchairs and those that have needs and disabilities, so that we can accommodate as many, if not everybody, that comes to our event. And so we do that, and then we get the bare bones essential of the floor plan. And then from there, we can go room by room. And so I believe the first room is a clown room. And so we look at that and it's like, all right, you know, what characters do we want in this clown room? There are some iconic clown characters, you know, Pennywise and the Killer Clowns from Outer Space and things like that, you know, and I guess the new one is Art the Clown from the Terrifier. And we have to think about, okay, what are characters that are both scary and kind of iconic that people will recognize and be like, nope, I don't like that, you know, or they know it. Or if the kids that aren't scared go through it, like me, I'm one of the weirdos that likes to go through haunted houses and just look at everything. Look at all the costumes, look at all the people, all the props on the wall. I'm just like, ooh. So I try to appeal to those as well with those characters. And so we hit up Spirit Halloween, you know, and see what clown suits they have and what clown suits we have from previous years. And sometimes just the clown in general is terrifying enough. And so for that room specifically, we're going to have, you know, this idea of we've got, I thought it'd be cool to have like a blacklight strobe, right? And so like, all right, what blacklight strobe can we use, and how can we ramp it up even more? So like, all right, what if maybe there's, you know, I just have a story with it. Maybe there's a hidden message, like maybe a kid or someone was trapped in there and they are leaving messages to the people to get out. So like, all right, well, what can we do that's reactive to the black light so it shows up when it flashes? And so we do some investigation and some research. And like, all right, there's UV paint that we can use. And so I work with the staff and like, all right, hey, you know, give you creative freedom, paint some creepy messages on the walls in the invisible ink. And my idea is as you walk in, you know, you've got the twisted clown music going on, you've got crazy clown lights going, and a black light strobe that's hitting these walls. You know, they're polka dotted, but there's messages showing up, and you can't quite make it out until you get close. But then, you know, we've got another idea that I'm playing with is having a bunch of mannequins in the room dressed up as clowns. So you can't distinguish who the actor in the room is, because, you know, when you go into a room, first thing you want to think is, all right, where's the scare coming from, right? So I try to think of ways to throw that misdirection in there. So you've got a clown actually from Spirit Halloween that is a motion tracking clown, so it'll track you as you walk through the room. So hopefully that throws them off, the mannequin throws them off, so that our scare actor can really, you know, be one with the space and work around to get the best scare. So that's kind of something that goes into creating that. So from the clown room, they go into one of my fears actually is spiders. As I like to tell my friends and things, my fear of spiders is like not I'm gonna run away, it's like I want to kill it. But if it's too big, can't do that. So then I am afraid. And so we're playing with the idea of having this lovely giant spider in there, along with a mutated spider that I've worked with one of my staff with to create. That's actually a puppet. So he's going to have a fake hand that is holding the spider terrarium, and then his one real hand is going to be manipulating this puppet spider that we've kind of made up to look like it's burst out of its cage trying to attack the person. And so he's going to be in the room with there, you know, we can create a story around it saying maybe that's his pet, or, you know, he stole a baby from the mama spider or something, and, you know, jump out and scare them. And so I've been playing with that, and so I actually took the time to make this lovely pool noodle spider. And that's also one of the things to think about when making a haunted house, is like what creatures you want to make and what you want to buy and what you can make and can't make. And I always say, you know, I will always try to make something. And if I can't make it, then hey, I learn a limit, and then maybe I'll try to push past that limit the next year. but I knew I wanted a giant spider, and so, you know, do some research, look online, look at ways to do it. You can make them out of pool noodles, you can make them out of chicken wire, you can make them out of EVA foam, you can make a lot of things actually out of anything, as long as you can think about it and envision it. And so this is actually a almost fully pool noodle construction. The pool noodles are just regular old pool noodles that I have used a heat gun to heat melt together. So I cut them to different lengths and fold them and take a heat gun and kind of melt it and press it together. And that's how I kind of made the base frame for this head, and then the butt part for it as well. It's kind of stuffed with some other things to kind of give it some more volume. And then the legs for this spider are also pool noodles that I cut into sections. And the fun, cool part is I made it so that you can pop them off for easy transport and posing. And so there's a segment here, segment that's like here, 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 and here to give it that nice insecty segmented look. And again, it's all just pool noodles that I melted together and shaped and formed to look kind of like a creepy spider leg. And so I'll continue working on this to give it a more hairy, gross spider look. And I'll add some paint and I'm actually going to use, instead of fake hair, I'm going to use jumbo knit yarn. So there's a use for any kind of material if you can think of it, which is why I enjoy the creative aspect of making all this stuff. And so we'll have our prop spider in there. The spider will be in the corner. We'll pose it up and think, all right, how can we flesh this out some more? It's like, all right, what do spiders have? They have spider nests, so we'll have spider nests in there with a bunch of webs everywhere. All right, what else is scary with spiders? All right, well, a spider this size, he might eat somebody, so we'll have some fake bones in there. All right, let's add some bones to it to tell the story more. Maybe there's some cocoons or some wrapped up victims in there, so we'll add that in there to really also bring out that environment even more in that area, to build a feeling in that room. So from the spider room, then they'll go into I think it's the Halloween room. So in that room is a composure of generic, just Halloween characters. So we'll have a Freddy Krueger in there. And so where does Freddy Krueger lurk in your dreams, in your nightmares? Play on that. And I know in some of the scenes of the movies, he's like in a boiler, steamy room because you're walking through an area you're unknown where you are. So we'll make some fake pipes and things to make it feel like you're in a boiler. We'll make a fake furnace to have some lights coming out of there to add to it. And we'll just add more and more as the rooms get built to really flesh it out. And then last but not least, we have like the dark room. And so with that, the idea is, it's not always the dark that we're afraid of, but maybe something in the dark. And so we're kind of playing with that, and maybe we'll have some low-lying fog and like a small, dim lit light so you can barely see. And maybe put somebody in there in a black morph suit or a creepy mask lurking in the dark, because you're afraid of the dark because something's in there that's going to get you. And play in that fear for the youth and the adults. There's some adults that I know that don't like the dark. And so they'll go from there and into kind of a display room where we kind of show them, all the work that goes into it, and maybe have some props and masks that people can touch just to kind of get that ooh-ah effect. So that's really how a simple version of the process that we take to create this haunted house. Of course, the larger the haunted house, the more steps there are, the more rooms there are. We include hallways and things. This year, there isn't really a hallway that they have to traverse. The previous year, we did a haunted cabin in the woods. So it's a very similar process. We took instead of going, different room having different themes, it was different rooms were different parts of a house. And what story is this telling? And so we told the story of, hey, you're coming up to this abandoned cabin in the swamp. But there's a creature lurking in that swamp somewhere. And you don't know where it's at, but also in this house there are some really twisted things going on. So we had, to play on to some popular things, we had the Ring Girl. So we created a fake TV that we had an actor crawl out of and scare them in the living room. And then from there, maybe it's a family cabin house, so there's a child's room, but it's a really creepy child's room, and we've got a bunch of weird dolls and things. And so we said, like, well, how cool would it be, if one of the dolls came to life? I was like, ooh, we like that. So we think of getting a giant teddy bear, we gut it, stuff it with foam, like a foam shell to give it some shape, and we put somebody in there. And as they walk through the room, teddy bear comes alive and scares them. So there's different fears that we just, and things and scares that we build off on within the big room. We try to have it all play together. So that's kind of little bits from last year. And then one of the staple creatures that we decided to do last year was a Wendigo that I helped make. And it was me on stilts that put me well over 10 feet tall, and I made like a weird grotesque monster body and a weird Wendigo head to kind of come out and stomp and scream and scare them. So it's just a really fun thing, and it gives you a chance to really, explore this what if, with creating a haunted house. And then with that, of course, you're able to explore the character creation, which is something that I really enjoy, and that's kind of how I segue into my cosplay piece. And so before I got into the haunted house stuff, I was still am, big into cosplay. I go by the handle of Omega Shrine Cosplay on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. I have 2 little videos that I try to share some knowledge with. It's all self-taught, just by my favorite YouTube university and going on other Instagram profiles and asking them how they did it and just really watching their process. The material that I use for cosplay is a lot of EVA foam, like upholstery foam for chairs. I got into 3D printing with resin and plastic, and I'll show some of that stuff there here in a second. But the joy of it is with cosplay is really, if there's a character that you can see, or even think of, I always say you can make it. And how you make it is up to you. You can 3D print it, 3D print a shell that you can then make and mold and form, or you can do it out of foam, or you can do the method that I like to take is actually using different bodysuits and upholstery foam to shape that character. So I've got some examples here. So one that I'm working on now, his name is Man-Bat, and he is a character from DC Comics. He's a villain. He's a scientist, Kirk Langstrom, turned into a bat creature through some various things. And honestly, I was making this first just as a tutorial for YouTube to show people how to make muscle suits, because I have another one I'm going to show you that I made, my Spawn, that I get a lot of questions on. And, I was like, all right, what do I want to do with this suit once I make it? And I was like, what, it'd be cool to make a monster. I was like, all right, what monster do I want to make? I'm big on the grotesque monsters, and I always wanted to try something with wings that I've never done before. So I was like, all right, what monster has wings that I think I could do? And then I just racked my brain through different ideas and creatures and characters that I know, and I came across Man-Bat. And so from there, excuse me, sorry. From there, I dug up a lot of references, a lot of different comic sketches, concept art, action figures and things for Man-Bat to figure out, all right, how am I going to build this creature, this person, with the skills that I have and the materials that I have? And so I was like, well, I can copy the same process that I use, kind of my Predator and my Spawn suit, which I'll show here in a little bit, and go from there. So the process is I take a undersuit, which is kind of hard to see here, but right here, and I lay the foam down on it to create a base anatomy, so to speak. So underneath here, you can't see with the fur because I've covered it now, but there's pectoral muscles that lead into the abdominal muscles, which lead into the obliques and things. And so I build that up to create this silhouette or shape that I want. And then on the sleeves, I have the muscles for the deltoids, the shoulders and the biceps and the forearms. And in here, I was like, monsters have really grotesque features like vascularity and things. And so I was like, all right, how can I make some veins? So I glued, actually this is just paracord that I glued onto the foam and hot glue, and then I covered it with a quote-unquote skin. So all of my suits that I make will have a skin, and I try different processes for this skin to kind of give it a real look. I try to get as real as I can. I try to imitate, become close to the movies, which in their process, they oftentimes have a actor that'll come in and they'll do what's called a life cast, where they'll cover the actor in a goop, in a goo, and alginate, and it gets their shape and form to a T, and then they have a lot of artists come in and sculpt that creature off of that form. And then from that sculpt, they take either a silicone or a latex cast to make a full suit. That is a very long and tedious process, an expensive process. Those materials are not cheap, and I do not have the budget of a Hollywood movie. And so this is kind of the method that I take until, if I can be sponsored by someone or save up enough to try that method myself, because I would love to in the future. And so when I go to skin it, for this Man-Bat suit, I wanted to keep it kind of fleshy and skin-like. So I took it's kind of a felted, crushed cotton fabric, and I laid it over the muscles to try and get somewhat of a lean impression look in the fabric and the the undersuit, so you can kind of see some muscularity there. And so when I put it on, it should look like I've got like a really big muscular arm. And then I also knew for man bat, I wanted, what's a man bat without wings? And so I looked at a lot of different references for wings, like actual bat wings. I looked at the man bat's character for his wings ideas. And so for that process, I actually asked my girlfriend, and I laid on the floor, and I had her trace my silhouette out that I knew I wanted. And then from there, I then sketched out a giant wing pattern that I then digitized, took a picture of it, and sent it to my computer, and then traced it in a software called Inkscape. And then from there, I could get a rough pattern of how I wanted my wing to be and to cut it out. And so I'll show you here in a second. Let me see if I can expand it. And so I created that pattern of this giant wing here. Now these boning bits here, I knew I wanted, but I didn't know what I wanted them to be out of. And this goes back to kind of like my idea of the character of the creature, is I wanted to be able to have my hand in there and to be able to control it. And I also didn't want it to be super heavy. I wanted to move a little natural, and so that it didn't bog me down. I just got too tired to wear it. So I decided to go with foam. So I used EVA foam that I reinforced with a clothes hanger and sandwiched it between two layers. And then I took a belt sander that I have, and I sanded everything circular and round and shaped it how I wanted it to be. And then I carefully pinned the fabric over these little bones here and covered it in glue and glued it down. And I got my wings. And it was a tedious process, first time I've ever done it, but I'm very happy with how it turned out. And so, you know, a lot of it is just going with an idea, trying it, seeing if it works, and miraculously, if it works the first time, great. If it doesn't, then you kind of go back to the drawing board. And so that's kind of how I've been working with this man bat character. And then you're kind of seeing the middle stages of this process. And so I've got a lot more to do. I need to tidy up the glove. I need to paint some details and some more textures onto the wings. I need to paint some more things onto the chest. And then I also need to flesh out the head that I'm making for it as well. So this is using resources around me. So I was like, all right, how am I going to make a bat head? You know, I can't sculpt super well, and I don't know how I would get the base form and shape that I want. So looked around online. I was like, all right, I'm familiar with 3D printing, so maybe there's a bat skull I can 3D print and then modify. Turns out, Spirit Halloween, they sell a bat skull mask that is very similar to what this is here. And so I bought it. You can kind of see inside of there. And I was like, all right, you know, let's modify this. Let's change it up. And so I chopped off the original ears, heat shaped it a little bit, added some extra stuff in there, and then built it up with foam clay to get the desired look that I want. I'm still not done with it, but that's kind of how I went about making this. You know, just modifying things and using the skills that I know I do have, and expanding some other skills. You know, I haven't worked with foam clay a lot, but it works similar to clay, and also to foam, like EVA foam that I use to make my costumes. And so it's been just a lot of different processes and steps and trial runs of things, getting this mask to where it is now. And I'll continue to tweak and modify it until I'm satisfied with it for the actual final build of the man bat suit. So that's that. And actually I have, you can kind of see, these are the bottoms for the man bat. This is what that upholstery foam looks like before it's been skinned. So this is just underneath these jeans, there are muscles and things that I glued down to some compression pants. And so this is what it looks like underneath that man bat suit. This is kind of what I know very well and have done 3 or 4 different times for some other suits. I'm going to show you my spawn suit here in a second. And so to skin it, you cover this in whatever fabric you want. So for the man bat, it was like a cotton crushed fabric that I used to cover it. And so I'll do that to these probably over the weekend and get them ready to go for paint. For my other ones, let me show you here. One of the first suits that I made was my spawn suit. I used a whoop, there go the arms there. So this is also a one-piece bodysuit. It's like a dance suit, I think is what it's called, that I put over a mannequin, and bit by bit I built up each of the little muscles that you see on here with upholstery foam. And for that, I did a similar method that I used for the wings. Is I searched online, all right, Spawn, you know, how do I want to make Spawn? Spawn has a very imposing and large muscular anatomy. I don't have that. And so I went and found a lot of different reference pictures and images of the anatomy that I wanted, and then I took that picture and I dragged it into Inkscape and I traced over all the bits of the muscle that were there. And then I took that and I blew it up to match the scale of my mannequin that I had. And then I printed it out, cut out all those little muscle pieces, and I traced them onto foam, cut them out, and essentially glued them down onto the suit to get what you see here. And then to skin this Spawn suit, I knew Spawn had a weird, skin texture. He's, was wearing a necroplasmic suit, and it wasn't just a straight superhero suit. So I wanted to have some texture, and so I did some more research. A lot of research goes into making these costumes, and what story you want the suit to tell. And I was like, all right, how can I give it a gross, burned texture? So I scoured and scoured and scoured. It's a lot of walking in Joann's and Michael's and things, just looking at stuff and touching things to see. And I came across cotton batting. And so that is a fuzzy cotton felt looking material that they use in blankets and pillows and things. And so I was like, all right, this looks good. So I got it home, and this is part of me, just trial by fire, trying it out, see if I like it, rolling with the results. And so I covered the entire suit in the cotton batting, glued it down. I was like, I want some more texture to it, because nothing's wrong with a little extra texture. And in the past, I've known that spray adhesive, if you heat it, it bubbles and foams. And so I covered the entire suit with a lot of spray adhesive and hit it with my heat gun to make it bubble and have some weird whelps and grooves in it. And I fell in love with the look of it. And then from there, to seal it, I covered it all in latex mixed with black paint to get this color here. And then I glued on some extra bits to get this emblem. And then I airbrushed this white and got what you see here for the Spawn suit. So that's the first attempt that I did with making something like this, and I went on to do it again to make a Predator suit, except I used a different method to skin it. I used actually pantyhose because I wanted it to be smooth, like the Predator skin. And so I used pantyhose stretched across the muscles, and then I used latex again to seal it, to give it the skin, just making sure it was a smooth texture, and airbrushed everything. For when you're thinking about armor and things, because Spawn has armor, just fell off over here, and Predator have armor, and any other character or costume, if you were thinking armor, like how do I want to do it? If you want to go out and find like legit actual armor, great. I can't do that. That also would be too heavy and too expensive. And so oftentimes cosplayers will use what's called EVA foam, which is essentially like yoga mat material, but a little stiffer. And so for Spawn, I have dabbled in the creation of patterns before making armor in EVA foam, and so I decided to make his armor out of that. And the process for making this is a lot simpler than you think. Oftentimes creators will make what are called duct tape dummies, which is where you essentially wrap the body part in saran wrap and duct tape. And then from there, you can then draw on yourself, or have someone draw on you what you want that armor to look like, or the shape of it, the basic shape of it. And then you cut that off, and then you lay it flat, and you can refine that shape or that pattern even more. And so for me, I had my Spawn suit already made. So all right, for the armor, I covered that forearm in that duct tape, or that saran wrap and duct tape, and drew on how I wanted this bracer to be. Laid it flat, and then I laid it onto the foam, traced it out on there, cut it out, glued it together with rubber cement, and then I had my base shape that I wanted. And then, Spawn, he fights lots of demons and things. So it's like, all right, I need to rough this up. I need to tell the story that he's been through a lot and a lot of damage. And so you can take, honestly, anything you want to weather and destroy and distort this foam to tell the story that you want it to tell. And so I've used a Dremel, I've used a heat gun, I've used a soldering gun, I've used sandpaper. There are some people that will use even more extreme methods, you know, to distort the foam, or even fabric. You know, you can weather fabric as well in the same process. You can take it to a Dremel, you can take it to a heat gun, you can take it to a belt sander. Some people actually use their cars and run over it. I haven't done that yet, but I've took it outside and beat it on the ground before. So however you can envision it to weather it, to create and tell that story, that's how you do it. And it's actually, I like to watch a lot of behind the scenes footage for movies, and that's how they often weather their things as well. They have like a weathering department where they'll take, you know, a wire brush and dirty something up. Or they'll take, you know, some oil or grease from a car and wipe it on the shirt, you know, to really distress the fabric. So you can use any means necessary to do that. Outside of EVA foam, you can also use 3D printing. You know, the world has become way advanced from when they were first making movies, and 3D printing is used to create a lot of the props that you see on movies. You know, they may create this item and then cast it, which means they'll similar to like the body casting, they'll cover it in they'll get their piece that's printed, clean it up with sanding and painting and things like that, and they'll cover it in that goop or that alginate or that silicone to make a mold. They'll have a negative space inside that mold and then pour something that's a little bit more durable and resistant inside of there. And so an example of that is I've got here, if you're familiar with any of the Mortal Kombat movies, you know, get the Sub-Zero mask that I have resin printed. I haven't painted it yet, but it comes off here a little bit different color. You can sand it, get it smooth, and then of course cast it. For me, I don't need to go through the casting piece because I don't need to act and perform and move. I just use it as a prop for cosplay, and I can just wear it. You know, I can attach some straps or some Velcro or something in here and just wear it like that. But in movies, like I said, it needs to hold up to the actor moving and doing stunts and things without it falling and breaking. Or if it falls, it needs to not break, because if it breaks, then that's somebody's job maybe. I don't know, or extra time to make stuff. But you can 3D print a lot of things as well. So if you are skilled in 3D modeling, I know very minimal, so I can make, you know, very simple shapes of things that may fit the needs of my cosplays. But if it's anything like this advanced, you can probably find it on a 3D or file, like a website. So there's like things like Thingiverse, My Mini Factory, things like that. You can go and find these files, or, you know, online you can search people that you can commission to create these things for you. There's a lot of different modelers out there that have built a reputation of making, you know, movie props and things, or custom things. If you can come with them with a sketch or an idea, they can work with you to create that. I've done that once before for a helmet for a character, but I haven't quite fleshed it out yet. So that'll come soon. So it's just a Sub-Zero mask, and then here's an example of a finished helmet that I 3D printed. This is one of the first 3D printed props that I made when I first got a 3D printer, because I had found the technology and was like, man, this would make making helmets way easier, because making something out of foam with a lot of complex curves and shapes is incredibly hard. You get better with time, as you do with anything, and to get a nice hard surface look to it. So sometimes you can opt for the 3D print. And so I made this helmet. This is a Red Hood helmet. And it's, like I said, it's all 3D printed. It attaches with magnets and things. And so when you go the 3D printed route, there's different levels of finish to kind of consider. You know, if you're wanting something that is super sleek, super sheen, super smooth, it takes a lot of effort. You know, whereas with foam, I can put it together, seal it off with like a Plasti Dip or a Mod Podge or something to give it a nice surface that'll take paint, and you're good. You know, with a 3D printed prop, you have to think about layer lines. And so what that is when you 3D print with plastic, it lays it down layer by layer in the plastic filament. Excuse me, sorry. And when you finish that, depending on your printing settings, you're going to get a lot of what's called layer lines. And if you want a good finish, good quality finish, you don't want layer lines to show up when you paint it. Because if you don't sand it and you just put on some primer and some paint, you'll get a lot of lines that'll show up. I don't have an example of that with me. And so to get rid of that, it takes a lot of sanding. As I tell my coworkers and friends, it's like I often lose my fingertips because of how much I will sand something to get it smooth. I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I oftentimes have to remind myself, like, hey, you know, it looks good. It looks really good. You know, Comparison is the thief of joy, as I'll tell myself. I'll compare to the movies or other things, and I'll not like something. But I have to look at it, take a breather, and like, it does look good. And so sand it smooth, and then you can go on to your painting. And with painting, depending on, what you want to look at or what story you want to tell, a lot goes into it. This mask tells a story of, it's been through a lot. It's been beat up. It's been damaged. It's been scraped. It's been hit. And so in that painting process is when you kind of tell that story. And so for this helmet, I wanted it to look like that. So you do like, your primer, your base coat, or your undercoat, sorry, and your base coat. And then when it's all pretty and finished, take a deep breath. Now it's like, all right, now I got to make it dirty and ugly, which is sometimes hard when you have a good paint job that you like. But then you think about it like, all right, I'm doing this for a reason, to tell this story. And so you go through and you can take, just like they would distress things in movies, you can take, files to the paint job to chip the paint, or you can take sandpaper, or you can take a heat gun, you can take a hot knife from like a soldering iron and really carve in your story that you wanted. So I did that. I took a file to the eyebrow and up here, and I took sandpaper and stuff like that, and then I scuffed it up. And then I go back in to detail those scuffs to make it look like this was a metal helmet, like the paint was removed and you're seeing that raw metal in there. So that's just something that I did with this helmet. Another layer to your props is you can add electronics to things. So for this mask, actually it's so old that the wires for it have come out, but you can, add wires and things to add lights. So like in normal superhero or anti-hero fashion, the eyes light up. So you can include lights in there. You can plan out, all right, how am I going to add these lights? You can buy light kits that are really cheap off Amazon, or you can make your own light kits. I've done both. You can look at the different types of lights for what you want to do. You can use, there's LED strips that you can use. There are really convenient home theater LEDs that are sound reactive that you can buy for 20 bucks on Amazon and embed those into your props as well. I have familiar with a game called Cyberpunk. I'm big on that. I have a Cyberpunk costume that I've made, and it has a LED collar that I've made, and I've made it react to sound. It's a bit finicky on the wiring just because it's very tight, and the wires to get into different areas was very tricky and difficult. It's the first time I tried it. But you can do things like that, or there's more advanced things you can do. You can use it's a program called Arduino, which a lot of prop makers and cosplayers use to program their LEDs to do certain things. So you may, have a lightsaber that you want, or an axe that you've made out of foam, and you want it to light up a certain way and show like maybe it's flickering or it's charging. You can use this Arduino software into like a little board, and you can program those lights with different code. So there's a lot of different things you can do with cosplay and props. You just have to think about it. It all comes back down to the idea that you have when you're making these things, and how much you want to bring that or flesh that character out. You can bring it to life. You can be very generic and simple with it. You can say, all right, here's a costume. That's it. No details, no nothing. Just there it is. But if you want to have it to tell a story, then you can think of, all right, weathering and damage and LEDs and maybe smoke or fog or something like that. And like I said, it just goes into how detailed you want it to be. So that's pretty much all I have to cover for the the haunted house making and getting into the cosplay and costume creation. I always say, people are like, well, I could never do this. Like, yeah, you don't know until you try. Always give it a shot. I didn't know I could do it until I tried. It was around in 2015 or so. I went to a lot of different cons and conventions with my buddies and saw these crazy costumes people were making. It's like, I want to do that. I don't know how to do it, but I want to do it. So you just sit down and look at YouTube University, look at, there's cosplay manuals. There's a lot of different resources out there to kind of just start working on it. Never doubt, what you can do. So give it a shot, try it out, keep trying. You don't start, from day one being a professional. I don't even think I'm a professional. Like I said, I just wing it and do it. It just takes time to hone what you're trying to do and keep at it. So that is all I have. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you get out there and try to make something of your own, or check out a haunted house, or pay attention to movies a little bit more and see and wonder, how they make that sort of thing. So, all right. Thank you.